All right, well, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Ed Karshner, Professor of English, and I'd like to welcome you to our little celebration of art. We're here to celebrate the end of, for some of you, your first semester at RMU, for some, the end of your last semester, but all of us need to celebrate and take a moment to pause and acknowledge the great community of scholars, all of us in this room, that we're all fortunate to work with. And so I'm glad to see so many of my great students that I had this semester show up, because you guys were fantastic. Specifically, we are here to celebrate the release of Dr. Pamboukian's new book, Agatha, Christie and the Guilty Pleasure of Poison. We're also here to celebrate the crazy talent that is housed in the English faculty at RMU. For the past 15 weeks, you students have shared your work with us, and I hope this is the start of a new tradition where, at the end, we get to share our work with you. We're calling this event Crime Time. One of the reasons is that your faculty seem to write and research in this area. Crime fiction also allows us, like any good folklore, to explore the what if from a safe distance. It allows us to participate in the mystery, to be pulled along as all the pieces fall together. It's that sexy voyeurism of the cautionary tale, the delicious violation of the thou shalt not. Crime fiction allows us to get away with something as a reader, as the evil are punished and the power of the vulnerable restored. As we finish this fall semester of 2022, let's escape into the world of crimey deliciousness where no matter how chaotic, no matter how confusing, there is a logical, reasonable solution just waiting for us to notice and put into action. But let's also celebrate the embarrassment of riches that is your English faculty. So we begin this afternoon with Dr. John Lawson. Dr. Lawson has taught rhetoric, linguistics, and writing at Robert Morris since 1998. He served as president of the Pennsylvania Communication Association and chaired the organization's interest group on performance studies for many years. His poetry collection, Generations, was published by the St. Andrews University Press. His poems, plays, and short fiction have been published in a variety of print and online venues and collections, including Main Street Rag, which is highly represented here with Dr. Carson, Dr. Lawson, and Meagan's book, her novel, Earth's Daughters, and Vox Populi. His plays have also been produced by theater companies, including the Hammer of the New Dominion Theater of the Deaf and Live Arts, all in his home state of Virginia, and the Pittsburgh's own Carlow University Theater and RMU's Colonial Theater. Dr. Lawson, I've told Dr. Lawson this is both makes me sad and also mad at him, that this is Dr. Lawson's final semester as a full-time faculty member at RMU. He will be retiring. I'd like to point out that Dr. John Lawson was and is the driving force behind the professional writing major and minor and the creative writing minor. In fact, he has been a program of one as he stewarded the creative writing offerings here at RMU, including Rune, RMU's literary magazine, and the podcast Lit Out Loud that, I found out recently, has an international following with listeners downloading episodes from England, Germany, and Scandinavia. Dr. Lawson did that, and while he'll be missed, and you know how I am. I'm sorry, I lost my place. Just as that, there are no, as you know me, there are no endings, just new beginnings. And final is a fatalistic word. I have no doubt that Dr. Lawson will return to us transformed in a new role. I just hope without horns, because that would be weird. But please welcome to the podium for the last reading as a mere faculty member, Dr. John Lawson.
Thank you so much. Oops, I forgot about the crime theme. I don't know how long I should read. Probably not long. I want to introduce a piece that I wrote called Homeric 2, Screen Door Universe, by reading a short piece from Homer's Odyssey. Then he emerged, moving just like a mountain lion, which relies on its own strength. Though hammered by the rain and wind, it creeps ahead, its two eyes burning, coming in among the herd of sheep or cattle, or else stalking a wild deer. His belly tells him to move in against the flocks, even within a well-built farm. That's how Odysseus was making his way out to face those fair-haired girls. Now, that's an example of the famous Homeric simile, which is a simile that is extended to the point that it completely loses contact with everything else that's going on in the poem, which is testimony to me about the pre-literate mind and how spacious it was, how ready to go down a rabbit hole. And I envy that, and I tried to recreate it with my limited literate mind in this poem, Homeric 2, which I wrote for Heather Pinson and Matthew Conboy's marriage. Just as children with glowing cheeks and tousled hair run breathless through their parents' house and drink some lemonade, then hurry out again to play and slam the screen without ever thinking of the sweat it took to lay those bricks, to hammer uprights into place, to pour concrete or lay turquoise linoleum, or of the struggle to save money enough to make the monthly payment, or to choose the furniture and load it onto trucks and move it in, especially the black piano, or of the thought and effort that it took to populate the yard with grass and bugs and worms, the woods high on the hill with squirrels and birds and dead raccoons, the sky with horses' tails and fluffy ships of the Armada leaning toward the sun. Just so, I ran in and out of the screen door universe of your love, never thinking. Here's a piece I started writing on Thursday after my last class. Modestly enough, it's called The Ultimate Song. I walk into the room aware this is the last class of my teaching career. Phil is already there. Surprising. He usually dashes in 10 minutes late. Today, he's dyed his hair purple. Mackenzie's in her seat, presiding, the adult in the room. A plum I've not achieved in 4 decades of teaching. Mackenzie, the other one, is absent. A COVID-created hole in this little world we've made. We read the document Peyton collected. Everyone's contributed a story to a tome we'll all take with us. Words to rekindle in some distant place and time these faces, this time, this place, this ardor, these imaginations. They edit in silence. I watch them working, each lost in in the worlds their words have conjured from the nothing. When we agree it's good as it can be, I bless them silently. Nate, Clayton, Spencer, and Julie stop by the desk to wish me happy. I lug boxes of bric-a-brac from office to car, then find the email. The bean counter's latest decree. The English program is hereby and henceforth suspended, pending ponderous crunching of numbers unspecified by persons never to be named. The threat hangs heavy. No more Phils, no more Mackenzies. My heart aches for my colleagues, the present and absent, the quick and the dead. A quarter century we've strained and harnessed together to build this rough wagon, even as we pulled it through swamp and sand towards some half-imagined sunny land. And now my soul sad final contribution to untether, stand aside. I drive away from campus, The radio reports small parts of the general madness. Mariupol bombed to rubble. No one mentions downtown Ambridge, long since strangled. Austerity, death of civilizations. Here and everywhere our children freeze among the ruins for want of one word rightly placed. On the radio, they play a melancholy piece for lone guitar, El Último Canto, the last song. I take the left onto Stoops Ferry Road and gun the engine up that steepest hill toward the top. Oh yes, but then beyond, far into the thin and sky blue smile that peaks between two huge dark clouds, the jagged jaws of winter. Congratulations, Sylvia. Thanks.
Okay. Our next reader is our Roger Gillan visiting writer, Meagan Lucas. Meagan has published over 30 short stories and essays, and they can be found in places like Santa Fe Writers Project, Still the Journal, Monkey Bicycle, Bull Magazine, and Pithead Chapel. Her short story collection, Here in the Dark, will be out this summer from Shotgun Honey Press. She earned an MA Ed in secondary education and an MA in creative writing. Most recently, she taught creative writing at Asheville-Buncombe Technical College, which is in North Carolina. She is also the editor-in-chief of Reckon Review. In my Appalachian Lit course this semester, we read Meagan's award-winning novel, Songbirds and Stray Dogs, which has won awards such as the 2017 Scythe Prize for Fiction and was North Carolina's selection for the Library of Congress Center for the Books 2022 Route 1 Reads program. And then those of you that were in my Introduction to the Study of Literature course, we read the short story, Picking the Carcass, which has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize, a Derringer Award, a Canadian Crime Writers Award of Excellence, and been nominated as the Best American Mystery and Suspense. I'm also excited to announce that Meagan will be joining the English faculty as an adjunct professor of writing starting in the spring. Meagan brings to the professional writing major not only her skill and craft as an award-winning writer, but also her knowledge of editing and publishing as the founding editor-in-chief of the literary magazine Reckon Review. So please welcome back to RMU my good friend and new colleague, Meagan Lucas.
Hey, y'all. I'm going to be reading an abridged version of Picking the Carcass, so I'm sorry if you were in Dr. Karshner's class and this is familiar to you. It came out in this cool anthology if you're into crime fiction. It's also going to be in my collection that's coming out this summer. Janelle was sweating, sprawled on the threadbare couch, ticking fan pointed at her undercarriage when the power died. The click-click of the blades coming slower and slower. Girls, she hollered, girls, 4 and 8. The little one's hair frizzed into a white blonde halo. Make sure the windows are open and strip down to just your shirt and panties, okay? Maddie, take your socks off, baby. It's over 100 degrees. You don't need socks. Maddie started explaining that she didn't like the damp feel of the carpet on her feet, but Janelle couldn't hear her over Rudy barking outside. Christ, that goddamn mutt, she whispered. Picked up an old bill for something and fanned her face with it. The ear-splitting bark seemed louder in the new silence. She could feel each howl in the hinge of her jaw. The cutoff wasn't a surprise. She knew she didn't pay the bill. She didn't pay any of the bills. To pay bills, a body needed to have actual money. Not SNAP, not an IOU, not a favor. Janelle rarely had any of them, but never any cash. I'm hungry, Mama, the baby said. You two go sit out back. The sun's going down. It'll be cooler out there with the breeze. I'll find something. But then she looked in the fridge and there was only ketchup. Food would have spoiled anyway, she thought, opening the freezer, stretching to the back and pulling out the only thing in there, a box of old ice cream. No clean bowls, so she scooped it into 3 mugs with a soup spoon and carried them into the backyard, wondering what horror she was going to have to do to get that power back on. What are y'all doing back here? Jessie asked, walking around the side of the house. Daddy! The girls screamed and ran up to him. Power's out, Janelle said. What do you want? I thought you might be in the mood. And his eyes slid to the back door. Oh, she said, and looked at the girls' mugs. She was, and it was about the only thing he was any good for. And she had a little time before it was fully dark. I could be convinced, she said, and rose, and her spoon clicked against the side of her mug. You girls stay here. I'll be right back. Don't leave the yard. After, as she pulled her panties up her damp legs, she said, leave me a bit for later. I don't have any more, Jesse said, buckling his belt. You do. You always do. You're getting too skinny, he said. You don't want your teeth to look like Misty's. I got a long time. I'll quit before then, she said, and put her hand on his chest. If I quit, you won't be able to come over here and get this whenever you want. It's getting dark, he said. You better let those girls in. You can tell me how to raise those girls when you start paying for them. While I'm all on my own, I do what I fucking want. She didn't want him to know that she'd forgotten about the girls or that there was all sorts of shit back there that she didn't want them getting into. Plus, Barry, her landlord and neighbor, had warned her not to let the girls on his land or to mess with his fancy horses. The last time she'd used the girls' safety as a lever to try to wedge some money out of Jesse, he'd threatened to call Child Protective Services. Jesse was halfway out the front door when he said, oh, and that dog was going nuts. If he gets off that chain, the county is going to catch him and kill him, and they'll send you the bill, too. He said that she got too crazy, too emotional when she was high, so she couldn't tell him that Rudy made her feel safe. That he was dangerous, a big pit mix, and she was afraid of the girls around him, but she liked the look on bill collectors' faces when they pulled into the yard and saw him. In the night, no one could get anywhere near the house without Rudy letting her know. She didn't have anything of value, but that didn't mean that someone wouldn't try to take it. A dead body was easier to rob, and she was near a corpse. Just bones, really. No meat left. She could hear Rudy barking when she called the girls back in the house, so after she got them through a cool shower and into their damp beds, she found a flashlight and went to see what his problem was. Halfway, she stopped. His barks were frantic, and gooseflesh broke out on her arm. Something was wrong. Time always took on a liquid quality when she was getting spun out, so she turned and went back to the house for the shotgun that she'd forgotten. Shining the beam of the flashlight on Rudy, he was at the end of his tether, furiously stretching towards the road where there was a dark lump. Roadkill or trash thrown from the bed of a truck, she hoped. There were no strange lights, but Jesse was tweaking, so he's probably seeing stuff. She walked closer to the lump, knowing that she was going to have to deal with it if she wanted Rudy to calm down. But she wanted to be able to sleep. It was a raccoon in a puddle of something dark. She put the shotgun down on the side of the road and found 2 sticks. She pinched the flashlight beneath her chin, and with a stick in each hand, she slipped them under the thickest parts of the raccoon and lifted gently, her hands shaking. The animal fell off the sticks and back down into the puddle of its own goo. She felt something wet splatter against her bare legs. She tried again and again. Rudy was losing his ever-loving mind, and she couldn't hear herself think, and Janelle finally just grabbed the raccoon tail and pulled it across the road and pushed it into the ditch with her foot. And as it rolled down the steep bank, the beam of her flashlight caught something shiny. Oh, shit, she said, and put her palm to her forehead and tried to picture the animal that she'd tried so hard not to look at. It was a raccoon, wasn't it? It had been so mangled she couldn't be sure, and now that it was under some brush, she couldn't really see. And what if it was someone's cat? And that glint was on the collar reflecting, and she'd be devastated if Rudy disappeared. And so she climbed down the bank into that ditch, and she found the animal, and there was no cat tag and no owner to call. And she felt relief, but there was a metallic shine. So she squatted closer, curious now, and grabbed a stick and poked at the body, and she tried to pry it out with a stick, but it wouldn't budge. So she stood, and she put her hands on her hips, and she chewed her lip, and when she squatted down and stuck her hand into the raccoon's remains and wrapped her fingers around the lump and pulled it out and looked at it under the beam of her flashlight, a gold nugget. And she looked around and swept the bushes with her flashlight, looking to see who was fucking with her, looking for Jesse, but she couldn't imagine him actually touching a dead animal, let alone planting something in one. And so if no one is fucking with me, she thought, and it was heavy in her palm, and gold is heavy, right? And how did you test if something was gold? Did you try to bite it? And she looked at it closely, and it was black with blood and glinting in the beam of her flashlight. I can't put it in my mouth. So she rubbed it on her shirt, and she looked at it again, and maybe just my teeth, but not my lips. And she closed her hand around it, and does it matter if it's gold? Yes. Bills. Food. My girls at home with no breakfast in the morning, and so she bit down. And it gave. And was it supposed to give? And she couldn't remember if that meant whether it was real or not, but what if it is? And so she stuck her hand back in to see if there were more. Later, she was exhausted and itchy, but Janelle felt really good walking out of the pawn shop with money in her pocket. And she went to the gas station and she paid her power bill, and then she put fuel in her car, and then she went to Food Lion before she could make a stupid decision. But then the money was gone, and she just had to be happy that she was picking up her girls from camp, not riding on fumes, and that she could take them home and put them in front of the air conditioner while she cooked dinner, and it had to be enough. Mommy, Maddie started as soon as they got in the car. Seatbelts. Janelle said, Mommy, I want to. Is your seatbelt on? I can't afford a ticket. And when she heard 2 clicks, she put the car in the drive and pulled out of the church parking lot before anyone invited her to a service. Mommy, Nevaeh is having a birthday party, and I'm invited, and I want to go, and please, everyone is going. And it's not till the weekend, and it's the trampoline place, and it's going to be so cool, and everyone is going, and I never get to go. And Janelle rubbed her forehead with her hand, and she remembered 3rd grade and hand-me-downs and never enough lunch and never knowing if her mama was going to be at the bus stop when she got off. And she remembered hearing about the parties and never being asked to join, and how it was hard enough for the kids with no money to get invited in the first place, and Maddie couldn't show up to a fancy party like that empty-handed. So she said, "We'll see, baby." And she scratched her arm. And just when she thought she was getting her shit together, something else came to remind her that she was a bad mother. So she pulled into her driveway and she turned off the car, and the little one said, "No, Rudy." "Oh, shit," Janelle said. His rope stretched across the yard like a headless snake. "Go on in the house," she hollered, and she ran for the back fence, and she discovered the big hole, and Barry was going to kill her. Not with his rifle, which he was known to carry, but with a big fat bill and a pink paper taped to her front door. She prayed that the damage that the dog would cause couldn't be tied to him. So she went in the house and made the girls store-brand mac and cheese for dinner, and she thought, who'd have thought, with actual milk and not just margarine? And they watched Dinosaur Train, and then she sent them to bed so she could find Rudy before the night was black. And she grabbed the flash gun and the shotgun right away this time. And she also licked the spoon in the little plate that Jessie had used right before as a present to herself for spending her money responsibly. It didn't take long to find him. He had found some treasure, his muzzle covered in gore, before someone had found him with at least 2 bullets from what she could see. She couldn't let the scavengers eat him, but she couldn't carry him, so she grabbed his back legs to drag him deeper in the woods where she could hopefully pile some rocks on him. But damn if she couldn't move him, and yanked, and he wouldn't budge, and she knelt down, and the emotion stole all of her energy, and so she petted his velvet head, and she rubbed his belly. And it was harder than she expected, with lumps. And she remembered that raccoon, and she thought, I'm fucking high again, though. That's all. I'm hallucinating. And I just need to leave him and call Jesse in the morning for help, and he'll help me, only because then I'll owe him. But if I pay him back, and he'll leave me a little treat. And she found herself chewing on her lip and running her palms up and down her arms. And then she thought about that raccoon again, and how if there was gold in Rudy's belly, she didn't want Jesse to get any of that money. Jesse, who always had money for his car and clean clothes and drugs, and never enough money to help feed his girls. And she knew that he was a regular down at Shifty's, and she couldn't remember the last time she drank a beer in a bar. That money was hers. She didn't have a way to cut Rudy open, so she looked for a sharp rock. Nothing. She picked up the shotgun and held it against the skin of the dog's belly and whispered, "I'm so sorry, big guy," and then pulled the trigger. And droplets peppered her face, but she didn't care. It hadn't sounded right. It didn't sound like shooting an animal, like meat and blood. The shot sounded like metal on metal, and she couldn't breathe. Back on her knees, she was up to her elbows in Rudy's midsection, her hands full of bloody nuggets shining in the moonlight. A flash of white drew her attention to the trees, and it bobbed between them. Someone had heard the shot. She wasn't sharing. She filled her pockets and grabbed the gun and flashlight, but didn't turn it on as she ran for the fence. Later, as she slid the handfuls of nuggets over the pawn shop counter, she noticed that one had a crust of dried blood, and she tried to pick it off with her thumbnail before the clerk noticed. She was almost finished when he asked, "Did Barry give these to you?" "What now?" she said, trying to buy time. How could she explain? "Barry's the only guy around here who has these, far as I know, collects them. Kind of a weird thing to collect," he said, "but he's nuts about them. I've been trying to get him into guns, at least guns you can use and they hold their value, and maybe he'll come to realize that these are a tough investment. Maybe he's trying to get rid of them. Y'all are neighbors, ain't ya? Did he give these to you?" And his eyes were narrow and hard and didn't leave her face. "Nah," she said, licking her lips. "I inherited them from my granddaddy. He's a miner." The pawn shop guy looked at her again, and she was sure that he could tell she was lying. Wasn't everyone trying to pawn something lying, though, either to him or to themselves? What did he care where they came from? She needed to feed her babies. Later at home, after she sat next to Rudy's water bucket and cried, she paid more bills and yet again had an empty wallet. And while she was microwaving some hot dogs and warming some beans, she got to thinking about Barry's weird collection and how it got into those animals' bellies and how she could get her hands on more of it. And she was pouring Tampico into the little one's sippy cup when she heard the snap. "Goddamn vermin," she said. And maybe if she could get a little more money, she could get the girls out of this place. And it sure would be nice to be closer to town, nice to be in a place where the ceilings didn't sag and the floor didn't have mushy spots and she didn't have to pray to get the toilet to flush or the sink to drain. And then she wondered about that mouse. And she hurried to dish up the beans and the wieners and got the girls settled in front of Daniel's tiger. And she opened the door to the cabinet beneath the sink where she knew the mouse would be in the trap, and she said a prayer that it was already dead. She usually didn't check on them some quick, not wanting to find one in the throes, but she had to know. She held her breath as she pulled it out, and she set it on the counter. Its eyes were open, but it wasn't moving. It was fluffy, a brown and white field mouse, and it looked an awful lot like her 4th grade class hamster. Its belly did look kind of distended, though. She prodded the tip with her index finger. It was too firm. Electricity ran down her arms. She opened the utensil drawer and looked for something sharp. She had a paring knife that would barely cut the apple and a steak knife that she'd stolen from a restaurant, and her stomach turned at the thought of having to saw. She picked up the paring knife and she pointed it at the animal's belly, and then she stopped and checked around the corner to see if the girls were still watching TV, and they were. She went back to her dissection, although it was feeling far grislier than anything she'd done in high school, and she'd wished for the distance of the sharp formaldehyde smell and not this warm pet fur scent. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath and pressed the knife into the mouse until she hit the trap beneath. And she didn't feel anything hard like the nuggets, but it was difficult to tell. So she spread open the cut, and she still couldn't see. And she couldn't imagine sticking her bare finger inside, not here in the kitchen, not sober. And so she used the side of the blade to put some pressure on the animal's abdomen to try to squeeze something out. And when it popped, it startled her, but it wasn't a nugget. Janelle realized this mouse was almost a mama. "Aw, shit, sorry," she said. "I ain't saying you're better off, but you might be. It's tough for us out here." And Janelle put the mouse and the trap in the grocery bag and looked out at the garbage can. "I'm an idiot," she thought, and wondered why she thought she'd ever be so lucky again. And then she looked at the new stack of bills that had arrived that afternoon and said, "'Cause I gotta," she said, "I gotta." So I'm going to leave you a few unread pages so that you buy my book, but I just wanted to mention that I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm so excited to be joining the faculty here at RMU, and I have nothing but good things to say about the students and the faculty, and thank you for having me.
Our final reader is our guest of honor, Dr. Sylvia Pamboukian. Dr. Sylvia Pamboukian is the director of the University Honors Program and a professor of English. Her research and teaching areas include detective fiction, the health and humanities, and the Gothic. She has taught classes on Jane Austen, romance fiction, detective fiction, literature and medicine, monsters and Victorian fiction, and witchcraft and Harry Potter. Her first book was Doctoring the Novel, Medicine and Quackery from Shelley to Doyle from Ohio University Press. She is a recipient of the RMU Outstanding Scholarship Award. Her new book, the one we celebrate today, is Agatha Christie and the Guilty Pleasure of Poison, part of Palgrave Macmillan's Crime Files series. Dr. Pamboukian's book explores Agatha Christie's own intersection of pharmacy and detective fiction. The printer, when it does that two-sided thing, anyway. In the introduction, Dr. Pamboukian describes her book as exploring the attractive power of poison, the sense of curiosity, and even naughtiness that draws visitors to poison gardens, detective readers to books about criminal poisons. Further, the book explores poison as a kind of empowered femininity that offers the reader the surprising pleasure of comeuppance. Besides sharing a love of crime and the Gothic, as well as having attended grad school in Western Indiana, not the same one. For clarity, I attended the one that smells, and she got John Cougar Mellencamp. We are also fans of Justified, which featured a powerful female poisoner. And I thought of Mags Bennett as I read Dr. Pamboukian's book, and Mags using the, quote, knowledge of the woods, end quote, to help transition troublesome men into, quote unquote, the great mystery. Dr. Pamboukian's book is one that explores the intersections of medicinal knowledge, literature, and folklore, all within a society defined by power imbalances. This is a very good book. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Pamboukian to the podium.
Hello. Thank you so much, Ed, for putting this together. This has been a lot of fun. It's a great way to end the semester. And thank you to Meagan and to John. I really don't want to follow either of you, and now I have to follow you both. So it's a real, actually, honor to do that and to just be on the same bill with you. So thank you very much. I'm going to read little selections because it is a bit of a long book to read out of reading. I'm going to start with the first page because it seems like a good place to start. And the first chapter is called Agatha Christie, Poison and Crime. As the story goes, Sir Winston Churchill was once at a dinner party with rival politician Nancy Astor when he lit one of his famous cigars. Nancy Astor was revolted and said sharply, "If I were your wife, I'd poison your coffee." And not to be outdone, Winston Churchill shot back, "Madam, if you were my wife, I would drink it." This incident may be one of those stories that are too good to be true. In fact, some deny it ever happened. But it has been told and retold for decades as a classic moment in the battle of the sexes. There must be something in this story that resonates with readers, that makes us laugh at Nancy Astor's implication that one might enjoy poisoning an annoying spouse, or at Winston Churchill's implication that poisoning is preferable to marriage with a controlling partner. Seen in one light, this story could strike us as a gross violation of the trust we place in our most intimate friends and family, never to hurt us under the guise of helping, never, as they say, to betray us with a kiss. In another light, the story is a delightful mixture of domesticity, retaliation, and poisoning. Why? Why do we enjoy stories about poisoning, marriage, and revenge? Now we're going to skip way ahead to Chapter 6, The Poisoner's Afterlives. Every chapter looks at a kind of poisoner who is funny, a kind of poisoner who is cheered for or liked or supported by the reader. And it asks, what are the dynamics of a poisoning story where the poisoner is not a villain? So, Chapter 6, The Poisoner's Afterlives. In the Gothic-inspired stop-motion animated film The Nightmare Before Christmas, Sally is a Frankenstein-type rag doll who is visibly stitched together, badly, by a mad scientist. He created her to cook his meals and clean his house, but Sally has her own ideas. Using plants from her garden, Sally poisons her creator and escapes his never-ending list of domestic chores. She does not confront her creator like the physically powerful male creature in Frankenstein, but spikes his soup like a traditional female poisoner and escapes the house when he falls asleep. When he awakens, he scolds Sally for disobedience and ingratitude, but viewers applaud Sally's cleverness, rebelliousness, and strength. The film uses poison to symbolize Sally's transformation from obedient drudge to rebellious outlaw, a woman bravely challenging sexist stereotypes. The Nightmare Before Christmas is one of a number of texts that depict poisoning as empowering, particularly for put-upon women. A group of such texts appeared during the girl power movement of the 1990s, then again in 2017, just in time for the Me Too movement. And these include I Love You to Death, Like Water for Chocolate, The Nightmare Before Christmas, Practical Magic, Crazy in Alabama, Gladiator, Gosford Park, and then in 2017, Phantom Thread, The Beguiled, and an episode of Endeavor called Canticle. None of these films is considered a feminist outlaw story akin to Thelma and Louise. Perhaps because that is Louise shoots a rapist and goes on the lam in a Thunderbird across the American West as a male outlaw might, while these women use a quintessentially feminine weapon, poison, to deliver well-deserved comeuppance for gender-based mistreatment. And this is not to say that poisoning in this period is always empowering. Contemporary films such as The Minus Man and Felicia's Journey depict male poisoners as disturbed serial killers. Others, such as White Oleander, Crimson Peak, Lady Macbeth, and Crooked House, also link poisoning and sexist double standards, but they depict female poisoners who are spiteful and greedy and selfish, people who harm other women and the community as a whole. In contrast, empowered female poisoners reject feminine self-sacrificing behavior in order to both vanquish their own demons and overturn an unfair system. As with male good outlaws, these poisoners must be champions, avengers, fighters for justice, perhaps even leaders of liberation to be admired, helped, and supported. For example, Sally's poisonings reject conventional, self-sacrificing female behavior, chores, vanquish her own demons, her domineering creator, and challenge Halloween Town's male-dominated social hierarchy, a pumpkin king, male mayor, and male boogeyman. In offering an alternative to gun-slinging outlawry, outlaw poisoners open up popular culture to new ways of resisting gender-based injustice. And notably, many of these texts depict both poisoning and witchcraft positively, whether literally, as in practical magic, through magical realism, as in Like Water for Chocolate, or by alluding to fairy tales and Gothic literature, as in The Nightmare Before Christmas. Since the early modern period, there's been a cultural association between poisoning, femininity, and witchcraft, although not all witches or poisoners were women. In early modern criminal procedures, the word veneficium was used to describe both witchcraft and poisoning. Modern texts retain this traditional overlap, but reverse its meaning from evil to heroic, aggressive to defensive, and cruel to justified. While these poisoners incorporate elements associated with witchcraft, they are usually not actual witches. So this figure might be called a witchy poisoner rather than a witch. For example, Sally is not a proper witch, and there are proper witches in Halloween Town, but Sally is associated with witchy elements. She grows henbane, deadly nightshade, and witch hazel in her garden. Henbane and nightshade were used in sorcerer's pomade, a cream witches used to smear on their legs to fly on broomsticks. Its hallucinogenic properties may have let them really believe that they could fly. The very name witch hazel encourages the audience to associate Sally with witchcraft. In addition, the flavoring she uses to hide the taste of her poison in the soup, frog's breath, recalls the witchy ingredients such as eye of newt and toe of frog, as in the witch's brew in Shakespeare's Macbeth. In his work on outlawry, Frank Prassel argues that Hollywood witches are not the true inheritors of the powerful early modern witch, because, quote, the young and attractive witches of recent fantasy have lost connection with crime, with titillation substituting for terror. In Prassel's view, other types of women, pirates, gunslingers, inherit the early modern witch's rebellious power. But this chapter suggests that the witchy poisoner unites the good outlaw tradition with its sense of crime as justified comeuppance, and the witchcraft tradition with its sense of femininity as powerful. As both a criminal, a poisoner, and a witchy character, but not an actual witch, the witchy poisoner becomes a kind of cultural shorthand for a femininity that defies conventional gender inequity on behalf of a put-upon subcommunity of women. Because this empowered woman is connected to traditionally feminine crimes, witchcraft and poison, she also creates an alternate history in which femininity is, and always was, rebellious and strong. If the witchy poisoner is not terrifying, it might not be because she is weak, as Prassel suggests, but because she no longer threatens the community as a whole, only wrongdoers. And quite the contrary, she avenges community wrongs through appropriate comeuppance, and so is cheered on by modern audiences. And now I'm going to skip to an actual example, and this one is drawn from Agatha Christie. The chapter then goes on to look at several films, especially from the 2017 period. But this is a story called Philomel Cottage that nobody has read because it's very obscure, but it's a very good one. So if you're interested in the obscure Agatha Christie, you should absolutely do that, although my reading does offer some spoilers. In Agatha Christie's little-known 1924 story, Philomel Cottage, a serial killer's fear of poison becomes his victim's greatest weapon. In the story, a young bride named Alex enjoys domestic bliss in an isolated country cottage with her new husband, Gerald Martin, who swept her off her feet and away from previous lover, Dick Windiford. On this particular day, she learned several surprising things about Gerald. He bought their cottage for £1,000 less than he told her when he took her savings to buy it. He told their gardener they're going away on a long trip. And his pocket calendar has an unknown event scheduled for 9 p.m. that night. All is not as it seems in Philomel Cottage. Ominously, Gerald dismisses Alex's questions, calling them Bluebeard's chamber business. Now suspicious, Alex hunts around and finds newspaper clippings about an escaped serial killer, and she recognizes Gerald in the photos. She believes that her murder is scheduled for 9 p.m. Playing it cool in front of Gerald, Alex calls Dick in the village under the guise of ordering meat from the butcher. And as 9 p.m. approaches, she anxiously waits for Dick's arrival and stalls by making Gerald coffee. When Gerald finally threatens to drag her into the cellar, she startles him by telling him she has something to confess. Thinking quickly, she confesses that she has been married before, to elderly husbands who died suddenly, hinting that the previous marriages are how she amassed the savings that they used to buy the cottage. As she warms to her story, Alex becomes immersed. Quote, she was living the part of a cold-blooded poisoner. She talks about the drug hyoscine and other drugs she handled when she formerly worked in a dispensary, and she repeats smugly, I make very good coffee. Increasingly agitated, Gerald finally interrupts her. I understand now why the coffee was bitter. You devil, you've been up to your tricks again. Afraid he will overpower her, Alex counters, I poisoned you. Already the poison is working. At the minute, you can't move from your chair. You can't move. By the time Dick arrives, Gerald has not only become weak, but has suffered a seizure and died. In the story, Christie contrasts the dynamics of domestic murder in different literary traditions. On the one hand, stories such as Ovid's Philomel, high culture, and Charles Perrault's Bluebeard, folk culture, depicts women as victims of sexual violence. In these stories, women are weak, easily overpowered by men, and socially vulnerable in isolated locations and independent positions. On the other hand, Christie points to a second interpretation of these legendary stories about domestic violence. In this tradition, the stories are not about female vulnerability, but about delivering comeuppance to male abusers. Bluebeard's comeuppance comes about through his wife's kin, who storm the castle and kill him before he can behead his latest wife. Philomel communicates with her sister, who then murders her children and feeds them to her husband as punishment. Where Philomel and Bluebeard's wife require outside help, Alex delivers comeuppance herself, and her tool is crime fiction. Although she doesn't actually poison Gerald, Alex weaponizes familiar motifs from crime fiction: the stolen drug, the spiked coffee, the elderly husband, the life insurance, and the gold-digging wife. Gerald believes her story because he has read it before. Alex's repurposing of these common tropes delights readers with the irony of a wife murderer being murdered by stories about a murdering wife. In Alex's triumph, Christie rejects stereotypes about women's weakness and depicts a hidden power beneath typically feminine actions like making coffee and calling the butcher and talking to her husband and reading novels. Christie's decision to have Alex talk Gerald to death seems an ironic commentary on a stereotypical complaint about the talkativeness of women. But there are two intriguing aspects to this choice. First, there is a connection between talking and illness. The well-known placebo effect occurs when patients experience the benefits of drugs that they have not actually received due to the power of suggestion. In the lesser-known nocebo effect, the reverse is true. Talking about a dreaded side effect or symptom may induce feelings of anxiety, pain, and weakness. Alex's incantatory repetition of the symptom, you can't move, invokes the nocebo effect and capitalizes upon Gerald's own anxiety about the crime he is about to commit. After all, nobody knows better than Gerald that spousal murder is real. Secondly, Alex's use of incantatory language draws upon the traditionally feminine power of witchcraft. A former dispensary assistant, like Christie herself, Alex mentions the drug hyoscine. As Christie doubtless knew from her days in the dispensary, hyoscine occurs in several plants associated with witchcraft: henbane, nightshade, datura, and mandrake. More importantly, witchcraft relies on language to alter reality through casting spells. Today we say sticks and stones may break our bones, but words will never hurt us. Early modern society viewed language as a kind of violence. The Oxford English Dictionary defines malediction as a curse, but also as an evil deed. In this definition, a curse is not just words, but an action in itself. Because of their command of language, early modern witches were viewed as the opposite of a proper, obedient wife, kind of anti-wife. This is true of Alex and Gerald. As a wife, Alex is isolated and powerless, forbidden by her husband to ask questions or even to make a phone call to the butcher. As an anti-wife, she has words and power. In Alex, Christie capitalizes upon the traditional connection between language, witchcraft, poison, and femininity, but reverses the meaning from wicked to empowering. By crafting her sentences and strategically silencing the receiver, she's able to have Gerald overhear an innocuous conversation about ordering beef, and Dick, on the other end of the line, hear only words urgently summoning him to the cottage. By tapping into this alternate and more powerful feminine tradition, Alex protects herself and avenges all of Gerald's former wives. So, thank you very much. After this is the copy of the book. It is available online. Palgrave Macmillan is a division of Springer, so it's sold through Springer Link. But I am going to be giving away this. So after this, I will be handing out little tickets, and I will do a draw, and one lucky person can win a copy and take it home. So thank you very much.
Well, as I said at the start, this has been an opportunity for the faculty to share with you what they do when they aren't teaching or grading papers. And there's that old dig, those who can do, those who can't teach. My guess is the dolt who thought up that did neither, because clearly the English faculty at RMU are doers. John Lawson is an accomplished poet and playwright. Meagan Lucas is an award-winning writer and the founding editor-in-chief of the very successful literary magazine, Reckon Review. Sylvia Pamboukian is an internationally recognized scholar on medicine, murder, and the macabre in literature. Connie Ruzick, who couldn't be here with us today, her book, International Poetry of the First World War, is redefining how we understand the savage and traumatic exigence of creativity. I'd also like to add that Dr. Rick Mills, who when he took over the Intro to Ethics class, realized how much all those books sucked, and so just decided to write his own and has a book contract for an Intro to Ethics book. And not to toot my own horn, but last summer I was a folklore research fellow at Berea College. My work got a shout out in the Journal of American Folklore, and my essay, The Weirdness of My Appalachia, was cited by the Weatherford Award Committee as being one of the pieces that gained that collection its award. And there was a very brief moment, one weekend in 2019, where my short novella, The Salt Creek Valley Monkey Dog, outsold Stephen King's 1922 on Amazon. But bragging is so unseemly. My point is that your faculty model the kind of educated citizens you will need to be, to train you to be doers too. That an English degree is about more than reading Shakespeare, comma splices, or whatever else foolishness non-doers think. At RMU, our English program trains you to be concise and effective storytellers, a storyteller with the ability to see the world through other perspectives and to express those alternate views with clarity and compassion. To understand that stories aren't just books we possess, but stories we are made of and participate in. When you fully understand how to read those ontological stories of the past, as we move always forward to the not yet, we can, as the old magical charm, Satyr, Arepo, Tenet, Opera, Rhodus teaches us, turn the wheel of time with diligence. There is no greater skill than, as RMU student Bobby Bradley put it, to be able to contribute to your own story in a meaningful way. Those of you who have just finished my Intro to Lit class know that what I'm talking about. We applied the rigors of academic research and critical reading, thinking, speaking, and writing to the production and recording of podcasts. That we are training you to have the knowledge and skill of a scholar with the ability to share content with a popular audience. That the critical reading, thinking, and writing skills needed by businesses are the same skills you use to create your art. The only difference is the when and where you do the work. So to close, and you knew you weren't going to get out of this without some folklore, as we come up to the solstice, that celebration of the ending of the darkness and the coming of the light, let's meditate on what that means to us here now. It often seems that art is under attack, that is demeaned, ignored, put on hold, but art doesn't care. Shit happens, and so does art. And it will happen no matter what the outside world or markets tell us about the value of art. Carl Jung showed us that. Actually, and Dr. Lawson talked about that too. If we don't create awake, we will create when we're asleep. And that's the power of art, and that's your power. So I hope you stick around, and let's take a break from the power dynamics of the classroom and talk like folks to one another. Good luck with the rest of your finals, and have a wonderful break, and thank you for coming.